Okay, we're going to go ahead and get ready here to get into your fifth video. This is again dealing with stress, and what we're going to be finishing up with this video is we're going to go into and finish up talking about what is the physiological uh, effects of stress that goes onto your body here. Now remember, going back to the other videos, okay, when you have stress, there are three key things that happens. The first is the fact that you have some type of an emotional reaction. Okay, when the stress hits you. Secondly, you have a physiological reaction. And then thirdly, you have a behavioral. So far, what we've done in the videos is we've gone through the first one, which is the emotions, okay? And we talked about what is the typical emotions you have when you are having stress. When you have a frustration, typically it's anger, although not always. But then we went into the physiological part. That's the part that you can't control when you're under stress. Your body's secreting these chemicals, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here with this slide. Then the last one we're going to get into today is talking about your behaviors. And there's two different types of behaviors that we can have when we're having stress. One is adaptive, the other is maladaptive. We're going to first talk about the maladaptive behaviors, then we'll get into the adaptive behaviors. Okay, when you're under stress, remember you have that emotion. So let's say that you basically are watching this video here, okay, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it cuts out and you can't get it started back up again. That's a frustration. Maybe in some cases for some of you guys that could be a thrill because now you don't have to listen to it. I don't know. But let's just say it is a frustration. So now you're kind of upset. You're a little angry at the computer because it's not going to get there and you want to get this done because you got a test coming up and okay, all those other things. So you have this stress going on. You have this emotional state. Your body then reacts to that because the emotional state you're having was from the amygdala here. That's the part of the brain that basically is our emotional state. After that emotional state takes place, the communication system that we talked about in chapter 2, dealing with the neurons sending out those messages, they connect up with now your hypothalamus. Now your hypothalamus then, once that reaction state comes into it, your hypothalamus reacts with its sympathetic division, and it's going to begin to pour out chemicals into your bloodstream, dealing with whatever the emotion is that you're having. Depends upon what the emotion would be for you. Your hypothalamus then activates the adrenals, and your adrenal glands then begin to secrete these chemicals. Now, two of the most important chemicals you need to remember for your test are catecholamines, this one here, okay, and corticosteroids. Now, corticosteroids actually comes from a different part of the gland family. Instead of the adrenal gland, it is actually secreted more by the pituitary gland. Okay, so you got to keep those two separate in that. But what they do is basically two different things. If you're having a stressful event where it's anger or it gets into that fight or flight mechanism where you are trying to build up aggression, then that's going to be increased respiration. The breathing gets heavier, your perspiration starts to get a little bit more, you start sweating more, your muscles get tighter. That's when you get into that aggressive angry stage, or when you're being attacked and you have to go into that stage of fight in order to prepare for that. That is the catecholamines that are just pouring through your bloodstream that's happening, that's dealing with that. When you're under a great deal of stress, when it is the other side, when it's dealing with something that you're trying to do with flight, then it's going to be more corticosteroids, which increases protein, fat metabolism, those kinds of things. The other one that goes along with that is glucosteroids, and that is also another type of steroid that deals with your flight mechanism. The problem of not being able to shut these off, of course, like we've been talking about, and we've been talking about in class too, watching the video on, is the fact that it can cause you all kinds of damage, all kinds of disasters. One of those is the fact that it can actually burn out and shrivel your brain. How it does this is, remember, we got these chemicals over here from the hypothalamus and the amygdala, and all that's being poured through here, okay? And as that's happening, those chemicals are flooding through your bloodstream. Well, blood flows to your brain. So these chemicals are coming back to the brain where they get re-energized again by more emotion being poured through it, more secretion of the chemicals, it's flooding through more. And as that's doing that, it's causing these neurons in your brain sometimes to overreact, kind of like an overcharge. And basically they just burn out. And when that happens, you're losing neurons, you're losing brain cells. And that's what can happen to our brains, in which, if you think about it again, just go back to when you're under a great deal of stress sometime, how hard it is, how difficult it is sometimes to think. You know, how mad do you get at yourself when you're under a lot of stress because you can't even do something right? You forget something now and you make some more stress and then you forget something else. It just causes a whole chain reaction. And that's what this is dealing with. When you're under stress, your brain basically begins to burn out. Now, of course, the great thing about this is we do have the ability of our brain to revitalize itself. That's through neurogenesis. However, one of the things that stress does do is it can block that neurogenesis from happening, so you can't reconnect or reconstruct some of that damage to your brain sometimes because of the stress that you're under. Okay, now we're going to get into the behavioral responses of stress, and this is where we get into the negative, okay? Negative, that is this one, the maladaptive behavioral stresses, okay? The other one, A here, adaptive, okay? This one, we're going to get into this one later in one of your other videos. This is the one we're focusing on now, the maladaptive behavioral responses. In other words, the negative. One of the negative maladaptive behavior responses that happens to us when we're under stress, and again, try to put yourself in these situations, think of examples where you do this, is where we give up and blame others. Now, sometimes that's not a bad thing to give up when your goal is not attainable. Okay, I sometimes have students come into my class, into my office, and they're like, "Hey, Mr. R, man, what can I do to pass?" Well, you're sitting at a 32%. Nothing. You're done. It's better to cut your losses, drop the class, see if you can pick up a 8-week course here, try to do something else to get your grade, but you're not going to make it, okay? That is where being maladaptive, giving up, is not a bad thing when the goal can't be attained. But, and oftentimes, it's not that. It's the fact that students just want to get the easy way out. Well, what can I do for extra credit? Well, I don't do extra credit, so you're screwed. Okay, that's learned helplessness. That is a behavioral disagreement where basically what do? We get into this fatalism. We throw up our arms and go, it's not my fault. The teacher just is an ass and they can't do anything right and blah, blah, blah. And you know that's not true. But we do that because it makes us feel better to blame someone else. We do that with our work, where we blame our bosses. We do that with our relationships, where we blame our other spouse or our other boyfriend, girlfriend. We do that because that's how we are. The other thing of learned helplessness is where basically you want someone to do things for you. Well, I just don't understand how to do this. Explain this to me. Do this for me. Help me do it. That's learned helplessness. And there are some students who these people are who can't do anything without being assistants. And that is a very negative thing when it comes to behavioral responses. It can also lead to this next one here, catastrophic thinking. And that is also very, very detrimental to people who gets into this one. And that is something you also have to be extremely concerned about when people start getting into that self-critical, self-blaming attitude where it's always blaming themselves and it's calling them stupid and all this other, because that can lead to very, very detrimental health effects. All right, the second really major type of maladaptive behavior that we can get into a lot is aggression. Aggression is intending to hurt someone physically or verbally, and you might want to circle this one, the verbal one here, okay? That's important as well. The reason why is because the fact that you don't just have to physically go after somebody in order for it to be aggressive. If I go up to somebody and I say, you're just a dumbass and you can't do anything right. You might have parents who do this to kids sometimes, their own child, telling them that they're worthless and they can't do anything. That is verbal aggression. You might have a boyfriend who does this to you when you are trying to, they're having a bad day, so what do? They take it out on you. Well, you know what? You're just not smart enough to pass that psychology class. Or maybe you're not good enough to do it. Those kinds of things. Now, Berkowitz believed that the idea that you would have frustration and aggression always together all the time, he found that not true. And so he did study after study, and what he found is that there is a high correlation. Every time that somebody would have a frustration where they would lose their keys or do something like that, most people would act out in some kind of an aggressive behavioral episode. Not everyone, though. There are many factors that can influence frustration leading to aggression, but you don't have to have that, okay? The other thing that got blown out after years of study is Freud. who we haven't talked about for a while. But Freud believed that it was good to get your emotions out, to take them out somehow physically, not on someone, but on something. Freud believed to get this pent up emotional outburst, to get it out away from your body, because if you keep it built in, it's going to cause you all other kinds of concerns, which that part's true. But this idea of blowing off steam, which Freud called catharsis, is not a good idea. So again, you have all this aggression. So what do? I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go hit the punching bag. Actually, that's not the best way to deal with your stress. Okay, that's a good thing to do for exercise. It's a great thing to do for if you want to relieve some stress, but not for aggressive stress. When you're under a huge amount of aggression, where you just want to go destroy something, you need to take that aggression and you need to twist it around and take it into some non-aggressive state. By just acting out aggressively from that aggression, it's not a good thing to do. Psychologists have found time and time again that it just fuels the fire, making you more aggressive, more angry. Number 3 is self-indulgence. Okay, self-indulgences is where basically you block out the problems you're having of your stress by substituting it for some other form of satisfaction. Gambling, drugs, alcohol, eating, spending, internet, getting on there and playing game after game after game on the internet is not a good thing to do with your stress. Now, some of you might say, no, that makes me feel better. But that's not the best way to deal with your stress. Now, there is a difference between you going home or you getting done with this video and you go play, an hour on your game system. Great. You took the time to get this video watched. You wrote down the notes. You did your homework. Now celebrate and give yourself a reward by going ahead and playing your video game for an hour. But spending 6 hours or 7 hours playing video games at night is not a very good thing to do. It's a self-indulgence, and that can lead to a lot of really bad behavioral problems. And by making it lead to a substitute, it can cause you all kinds of difficulties then. Now, we're not just talking about the internet when it comes to gaming. There's internet addiction when it comes to, of course, pornography. There's internet addiction when it comes to other things. There's Facebooking and stuff like that. There's also all other kinds of problems that gets into as well when it deals with stress. Okay. Then you also have, drugs and alcohol and all those other kinds of things as well. The fourth one then is dealing with defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms is dealing with unconscious reactions that protects a person from unpleasant emotions. When it comes to defense mechanisms, basically, we talked about this earlier before, the purpose is to shield the individual from emotional discomfort. Basically, when it comes to a defense mechanism, you have this self-deception. Now, again, Shelley Taylor and Jonathan Brown did a study on this in which they said, you know what, it's not bad sometimes to have what's called positive illusions. That's not a bad thing to do, where, okay, let's say that you took a test and you didn't do very well on the test, and so what do you say about it when someone looks at you and they're thinking that you're going to get all upset, and you say, wow, it's just one test. It's not that big a deal. I'll get over it. That's a pretty good defense mechanism, okay? Maybe you're, throwing up a little bit of a projection there. Maybe you're getting into, maybe you're displacing a little bit, but that's not a horrible thing, according to Taylor and Brown. Because sometimes in order to help us cope with our life's difficulties, we need to put up that shadow or that wall to kind of separate the stress from us for a while. But what Baumeister says is when we put up that wall and we make it so big, so large, so massive that it takes over our lives, that's called the optimal margin of illusion. And that can get into extreme bad maladaptive behavior then. And you have to be extremely careful with that. So again, these are the 4 negative ways to deal with stress, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these in class. And then the next video, the last one we're kind of get into, hopefully, is going to get into the positive ways to deal with stress.